You're listening to 94.4 FM with myself, Jimmy Petruzzi, on the Friday Sports Show, Salford City Radio, 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show. We've got some really fascinating guests on this evening's show. We aim to bring you all the news from around the world and the local area. We support all the local clubs and coaches, and we aim to promote sport in the area. But we also like to bring you what's going on around the world too, and bring you some really interesting guests. And there's no more interesting than our first guest this evening, Lawrie McKinna, who at the moment is the CEO of the Newcastle Jets in Australia. He's also managed Central Coast Mariners. He has also coached in China and being the mayor of Gosford as well. So really intriguing guest who's going to sort of share his thoughts on football in Australia, in his native Scotland as well. He played for Kilmarnock, so it'll be fascinating insight into his perspective in the global game. Lawrie, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Cheers, and always a pleasure to speak back at home, because obviously I'm Scottish born and I've been in Australia for 33 years, although my accent doesn't show that.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on board, Lawrie. Fantastic to have you on board. And obviously you've sort of coached around the world, and you know it's quite intriguing for the listeners in terms of your perceptions. And we sort of start, in Scotland, and Scotland has been, obviously a proud footballing nation and has produced managers over the years, second to none. And I remember Scotland. Watching Scotland in the 80s when I was a wee lad, so to speak, in terms of... actually, I remember a playoff against Australia, Lawrie, and me watching the game, and had the likes of, McAvaney and your Dalglish's, your Souness's, and all these sort of players as well. And, what do you make of the Scottish game at the moment, Lawrie, in terms of your own perception? Will there be? They've got some good players now, like Robinson and a number of other players. But can you see him getting back to those heights again, from your perspective?
Well, I don't. Well, obviously, I'm at arm's length now, but I was back a few weeks ago, and I went to the Rangers Celtic game and then Rangers Kilmarnock game, and obviously Rangers beat Celtic, so I was happy, and then Kilmarnock beat Rangers, when I'm a Rangers fan, but to see Kilmarnock qualify for Europe was very good. I was quietly kind of happy that Kilmarnock qualified for Europe. But when you look at the national team's results, and they always seem to be sacking managers just now because they blame the managers. But my opinion has been the same for years, and it could be wrong, but in my opinion, that there are too many foreigners coming into the game now who aren't any better than what's available in Scotland, in my opinion. And it's the same in Australia. If you bring the foreign player in, it has to be better than what you've got. And I just think there are a lot of bottom-end foreigners going about the Scottish game that's keeping young Scottish boys from getting the opportunity to come through.
Yeah,
and I know I look at Gerrard, and Gerrard's bringing in a lot of loan players from England, and they're coming in and doing the job, so credit to them, they've improved. But you look at your run-of-the-mill, even Kilmarnock, who's obviously not one of the biggest teams in Scotland, but half the team would have been loan players that Stevie Clark brought up for England. So it's keeping that young Scottish player, giving them less opportunities. And the same thing happens in Australia. Good upcoming players will go overseas, get a chance overseas before they get a chance in the A-League sometimes.
Yeah, no, great point, Lawrie. I think that's, I certainly share the same sentiments, exactly. I think that there's an abundance of local talent, and I'm all for bringing players in from abroad if they're better than what you've got and they can improve the game. But, certainly over the last few years, we're seeing more and more players coming into the game. It's almost like fashionable to, depending on who's doing well on the world stage, we'll go to their second tier of football, and it's marginal at the very highest level anyway. It's very, very marginal in terms of the levels of ability between different teams and different countries, and there's an abundance of talent, absolutely, that doesn't always get the chance. But speaking of Australia, for me, Lawrie, I felt that this is sort of my perception. Now, I could be wrong, but you'll know more than me. I felt at 2006 that there was an opportunity for the national team to kick on. There was excitement. The A-League was, introduced as well in and around that time, or after that time. I stand corrected, and there was almost like a buzz that the nation could kick on from a footballing sense. And for me, it's like, okay, have they sort of progressed from 2006? Is it other nations have caught up? Because obviously in Asia, I think it's easy to underestimate the levels of some of the Asian national teams? Is it the other teams have caught up, or is it they've not kicked on, a bit of a combination of both? But where do you see the Australian team at the moment from your perspective?
I think you have to admit, I think it's just not kicked on. So 2006, great in the World Cup. And again, there's a lot of debate about the Institute of Sport down in Canberra. So that was the last kind of age group of the golden generation coming through, because at one stage, there were most of the national team were playing in top divisions all over the world, not really in Australia. They were all over. Now you look at it, we've got very, very few players playing in the top divisions. There's still some there, but we've not got a handful of them. So a lot of the development stopped when the Institute changed its programs, and obviously that come down to funding. So I think that stopped the development coming through. But I think a lot of the smaller Asian countries, your Vietnams, Thailand's, even like China's the sleeping giant. You look at Japan, are decent. Korea's decent. They're organised. They've got skill. The Koreans are powerful as well. A lot of these smaller nations have caught up in Aussies, because the last Asian Cup, we were the reigning champions, and I think we went out in the quarters, but we weren't very convincing at all. And you looked at the team that was put out, and it's no disrespect for, I was never a national team player. I actually played for Scotland over 35s in Australia once at an ethnic World Cup, but I never actually played with my full national team. So these boys are playing the national, but you would hardly know any of them, because a lot of them playing overseas in lesser divisions. And you look at the team and go, wow, who is that? So it's not as though they're household names. So combination of both, the smaller Asian countries are investing more money in development, and the Australian games spending less in development. So it's definitely a combination of both. Yeah,
no, definitely. And I think sometimes too, from what I can see, certainly in Asia, there's that sort of passion for the game and to keep developing the game. And I think that, like you says, China is certainly a sleeping giant in the sense that it's got a huge population, and I suppose the game doesn't have to catch on that much there for there be enough players to be able to get involved to make a big impact. But as you know more than most, you were out there, Lawrie. What's the game like in China at the moment? They've sort of, from what I can see, invested in bringing players over there. They've had some sort of marquee players and coaches going out there. Is the game progressing there? When do you think we'll see them actually become we'll get to the World Cup to begin with, and put out a really strong competitive team? How far off do you think they are from doing that, from your perspective, from being out there?
I was there for just over a year in 2012. They've invested a huge amounts of money, and they can't sustain it. It's starting to crumble a bit now. So the game's in a bit of a crisis at the moment. They're still spending huge money. They've got an abundance of foreigners. So when you look at the Asian Champions League, when the Aussie teams are up against the Chinese team, at the moment we can't compete, because their budget might be 40 million US, where the Aussie budget's 4 million US, or 4 million Aussie. So we can't compete. So they're bringing top foreigners out, and but they're also bringing a lot of dud foreigners out who are getting paid huge money. And the reason they bring an overseas player is to set an example, show professionalism. And in my time in China, that's not necessarily the case. A lot of them come out at the end of the career, it's just a payday, disrespectful, take the money and go. And I wasn't brought up like that. If you get good money, it doesn't matter. If you're doing something for the job, you do it the best of your ability. It doesn't always happen. The Chinese players are very skillful, great technique, but mentally they're not the toughest, and that's the one drawback of China. So the Chinese government has put in hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to develop football schools. I think by 2017 they had to build 20,000 AstroTurf fields to get put in. I think there's 17,000 schools now with football on the curriculum. So they're really pushing at grassroots level now. Some of the big clubs still get really big crowds, it gets good exposure, but the game's a bit fragmented. It's such a big country, and I think at the top level at the Chinese FA, there's so many chops and changes every year. It doesn't seem to have a unified plan for the country, like a development plan. This is the curriculum, this is how we're going to develop our players. They don't have it. It's every province is fighting against every other province to try and prove that they're doing the job right.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, Lawrie, that's for sure. And I think from my experience, I was over in the States recently, and I sort of had a look at their game and how it was progressing. And I think that in some respects, from an outside perspective looking in, I thought, well, it's a similar thing where I think that, over there, college football, university football, or university sport in general is really competitive, really, really strong. And I think they've sort of laid the groundwork for the MLS. But the same again, it's a big country geographically, and I think that one of the biggest challenges, no doubt, is to have a tier of football. And I know in Australia there's been talk of a second league. I'd be interested to see what your thoughts are. I mean, obviously yourself, you've sort of managed the Central Coast. Our listeners will probably be aware of the Central Coast. For Usain Bolt as well recently, not long ago, going out there and a trial.
That was embarrassing.
Yeah, and I mean, my exact sentiments too. When I heard the news, and I can appreciate people trying to be proactive and that sort of stuff, but at the end of the day, there's sort of like I suppose there's a professional line that, but it is what it is. But from your perspective, where do you see the A-League in terms of ability, Lawrie? How would you compare the A-League to? Because there's a lot. I know we'll get an honest and open answer from yourself. I mean, we get, I get certain people talk about the A-League, and it's quite variable in terms of their perception of where it would stand in say European level. But what are your thoughts yourself? I mean, where do you see the A-League compared to say a European league?
I think it's a decent standard, and the way I gauge it, I look at foreigners who come here. So you get boys who come out of England, like Lafondre. He's playing at Sydney FC. He was playing in the Championship. He scored goals most of his career, and he done a reasonable job. So it wasn't like he was a superstar, but he done a reasonable job. Dwight York came out here when he was finished, and he done a reasonable job as well. But you look at a lot of other boys with big names that come out and they don't do well. They can't. The physicality, I don't think it's overly physical, but the physicality. But the big thing here is it's different for Europe. Is we play through the summer, and if you watch the game on TV here, and obviously you see the games Friday nights, Saturday nights. Then you get a game on a Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock in the middle of summer where it's 30 degrees, 32, 33, 34 degrees. The sun's right over the park. It's a totally different game. The game slows right down. You normally look at a Sunday afternoon game, and I don't like watching it on TV. I don't like when Newcastle Jets play because the heat is a big factor. The style of football you play is totally different because it's the conditions, the humidity and stuff. So I think it's hard sometimes for players to come here.
Yeah.
People flag the A-League. I don't think. I go to Europe always when I'm back in Scotland. Like once a year I go to games. I watch football on TV, and I think a combination of weather, the depth of our squads probably is not as deep as what the European clubs are. But I think the standard's decent. A year ago now, we went to Spain pre-season. We played two Middle Eastern teams, top division teams, who were in the Asian Champions League. We drew, we won, and we won. We beat one and we drew, we won. And these are ones, they're allowed 8 foreigners. We're all in 2 million US each. So we spent 4 million Aussie. They were on 2 million US each, and our full budget was 4 million. And we beat one of them and we drew with the other one. So you look at that and go, pre-season, we're in the mix here. But obviously our budgets are a lot less than Europe. But I think the standard's okay. I think we're a bit harsh on ourselves by saying it's, because we're going through that stage at the moment, same as the MLS, the J-League. The first 10 years the game was flying, then it dropped, and then it came back again. Well, we're at that stage, but a lot of that's our own fault because we had all the problem with our constitution for 2 or 3 years, then the chairman resigned, and then now we've got the A-League clubs fighting the FFA to get the independent A-League. And then we had the problem with Alan Stajic getting sacked before the Women's World Cup. Now the women have not done as well as possible. So there's been a lot of doom and gloom about it. There's too many negative things going on about the game. So we're actually shooting ourselves in the foot at the moment, instead of talking the game up for all the good points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. I think sometimes it's easy to look at the negative points and not focus on the positives. And everyone wants to do well. And I think the thing with football too, Lawrie, it's a tough sport to do well. I think sometimes people see other codes, other sports, and see national teams doing well. But in football, it's a different ball game. It's the national team sport in a lot of countries. And in football, one of the biggest levels for me, I think one thing I've certainly got from the conversation with yourself today is certainly from a financial point of view. You see certain countries invest millions like China, but it doesn't give you a right to be up there. And you see certain countries around the world that don't have a great deal of money. In Africa, for example, they produce some top quality players. I think that's a big takeaway for me in terms of the desire to want to play and get out there. And I think for me, in one sense, we've seen the likes of Spain and the likes of France, and they've got that sort of infrastructure from top to bottom, from grassroots. They've got loads of coaches. They've got loads of people involved in the game. And I think that for me, it's getting as many qualified coaches as you can. Setting things up from grassroots and going to the top, really having a pathway to move forward. But in terms of the Jets, Lawrie, how do you see you guys doing this year? The Jets, any sort of thoughts around where you see you guys, how you see you guys getting on this season?
Yeah, well, a season ago we made the grand final. We came second. It's a great year. This year we'd draw. Our main striker was suspended for 10 weeks for the incident in the grand final. One of our main wingers was out for most of the season. Our squad was a wee bit lighter on, and we just missed out in the finals. This year, we'll be cutting the budget back, but I think we've got better depth. Our 2 main kind of overseas players we've let go, which was the bulk of our budget, because again, nice guys, nice players, and you get fans coming up and saying, "Oh yeah, why do you let him go? Why do you not keep him?" And then you tell them, "Oh, would you give him 600,000 Aussie dollars as a wage?" I went, "No, that's a lot of money." I said, "Yes, it's a lot of money. That's what it costs you for a player like that."
Mm-hmm.
And it was nice getting a nice flick, a nice wee 1-2 here and there, but it wasn't enough. So we've got rid of 2 of them, and we've brought in quite a few attacking boys. We've just signed the striker for Panama's national team, who's playing in the American tournament just now. He scored the other day there. He's 25, played 40 odd games with the national team. So in Panama you can get players at a good price, so we'll be bringing him out in August. But I think we'll be reasonable. I think a bit more depth up front. That's where we struggled last year. Defensively was good. We just didn't score enough goals, and we've signed 2 or 3 forward playing players, and I think we'll be a bit stronger than last year.
Yeah, and that's obviously wish you all the best for the forthcoming season, Lawrie, and yourself. You've been a credit to the game in Australia. You've sort of the more people like yourself in the game, the more optimistic I think that the fans and supporters can be, because I think that it does require that level of honesty from across the board. It's sort of for the game to go forward. That's crucial for me to look at things the way they are. Nothing worse, nothing less. Yeah.
Our fans are quite vocal, and if the fans are right, I'll be on social media agreeing with them, telling them we've got it spot on and we've stuffed up. But if our fans are wrong, I'll go on there and explain they've got it wrong, and this is the reason why they've got it wrong, and explain, because why hide anything? Let them know, because a lot of the people, although they're fans, they don't know the inner workings of a football club, and they don't understand the big contracts. And they think you can just get rid of players and bring players in, and so I like to just be honest with them. I've been on social media tonight because our membership manager's off sick for a couple of days, our intern was off, and nobody was answering the phone for season tickets at one stage. So but I've sent a private message to the person, blah, blah, I've got his number, I'll pass it on and he'll get a phone call tomorrow. That's not my job to do that, but it matters to me that we are respectful to the fans, we're respectful to everybody, and you just have to do the right thing with people. So doing that thing a wee bit extra, people will respect it, and the word gets out there that the club cares. And in Australia, we've not got that history of 100 and odd years of football. Like I saw today, Glasgow Rangers Stadium holds 50,000. They've sold 47,000, so many hundred, and they've got 14,000 on the waiting list. We're not at that level. We've not been playing since 1872.
Exactly.
We've been in the go for 15 years, and we're averaging 9,000-10,000 people. And that was in an average season. Season before was at 12,500 people, which in the world rankings, I think we're ranked in about 14th in the world for the size of crowds. And for a country like Australia, where football's like the number 4 sport probably behind rugby league, AFL, and probably cricket, then it would be us. It's decent.
Absolutely.
So we've still got a long way to go, but again, we don't have that history and that the passion that doesn't matter how your team's doing, you turn up and support your team. And that's how I was brought up. You didn't matter. Yeah, you want to go and see your team win every week, but sometimes it just doesn't happen, and life's not perfect, unfortunately, and your team doesn't win every week, but we seem to have a lot of fair weather supporters in Australia.
No, absolutely, and that's one thing for sure in Scotland. Having had the experience of watching domestic football in Scotland and the national team as well a few years ago over at Hampden, it's an incredible atmosphere. Just the vibe, the buzz. Really, it's hard to describe. I think it's only an atmosphere that you can get the feel of if you go there. And I always encourage people to go up to Scotland and watch a football game. Put that on the bucket list, because the atmosphere is just second to none. And I've been quite fortunate of seeing many football teams across the world over the years, and certainly I think that Scottish football, the buzz out there, it's up there, if not the greatest atmosphere that you can get. It's just a buzz, and it's a buzz, not just the game itself, Lawrie, the actual sort of day out itself, where the build up to the it's incredible. And when you see people like in the city centre, in the streets of Glasgow, getting ready for the game, it's just an incredible buzz. It's like a New Year's Eve type electrifying atmosphere where you just big anticipation. It's just hard to describe, but I certainly would recommend anyone, if they really want to they love their football, put that on the bucket list. But it'd been very, very great to have you on the show, Lawrie. I'm sort of mindful of time. You're very kind enough to join us, and I'm very thankful for you to come on board and share your views and insights with the listeners. I'm sure they'll get a lot out of it, and it's great to hear from you. Thanks, Lawrie, for being on the show.
That's no problem. Anytime during the season, happy to come on.
Great. Thanks, Lawrie. All the best, mate. So you're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, 94.4 FM with Jimmy Petruzzi, the Friday Sports Show. What a fascinating guest Lawrie McKinna was. What an incredible insight into the world of football in Scotland, in Australia, in China, and what an honest and open insight into football and his experiences. A refreshing change for someone who's managed at and coached at a very high level and coached around the world, to give us a really honest appraisal of the way things are, telling it like it is. Our next guest, we've got 2 guests now, and an action-packed show today, is Colin Bell. He's a performance coach. I've known Colin for a number of years, and it's great to have him on the show. He's going to talk about all things performance. So Colin, welcome to the show.
Hi Jim.
Great to have you on board.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And we've also got a 13 times world and 4 times Commonwealth Paralympic Champion in cycling, Neil Fachie, coming on the show as well shortly. But what an action-packed show. It's an incredible show we've got lined up, and do tune in. We give you all the local news and all the news around the world, and it's fantastic. So, Colin, what are your thoughts in terms of performance in general? How important do you think the mindset is? At the moment, for the last few weeks, we've looked at various sports at international level, and basically we've seen how important the mindset is to succeed in sport. What are your thoughts? Where do you stand on the mind being key?
Yeah, I think more and more the mind is becoming, I suppose, where perhaps historically the physical, the nutrition, all the other aspects of the game were perhaps more overemphasised and more accessible, for a lack of a better term. And I think certainly in my experience, being in and around kind of performance for the last 8-9 years, I think people are more open to the idea that if they can address and understand the mental game a little bit better, then they're going to get better results. And I suppose also that they have a little bit more control and a little bit more understanding of it.
Absolutely, precisely, and it's great to have in the show, and hopefully you can share a few tips with us and our listeners. Come from a wide range of different sports, but also our listeners too. They love sport. They love watching sport. They love participating in sport. One of our goals is to increase sporting awareness in the area. We're very fortunate in this area to have some great sporting clubs. You've only got to go a few miles either way, and you've got some great sporting establishments, and you've had some fantastic athletes come through this area too. So it's going to be great to get an insight into your perspective as well. What your thoughts are on how we could sort of not just regulate the mind in sport, but also life in general, because life can be pretty damn tough as well. And it's just having that sort of mental edge as well, just in general, transferring those skills too. So you're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, with myself, Jimmy Petruzzi, the Friday Sports Show. And we've had a really interesting insight from Lawrie McKinna, who's coached around the world in football, and at the moment CEO of Newcastle Jets in Australia. And Colin has joined us in the studio, who is a formidable coach who's had the experience of working with top-class athletes and also businesses and other areas too. And he's giving us an insight, and he's going to hang around until the end of the show. And we've got an amazing guest coming up now, Neil Fachie. And when you win, I can't imagine what it'd be like to win 13 world and 4 world championships and Commonwealth. Being world champion and of this level, really a Paralympic champion in cycling, and I think it's a great opportunity for the listeners and for myself and the listeners to get an insight into what it takes to be the best. And it's one thing being the best in my experience of sort of being involved in professional sports, but it's also maintaining it. It's incredible to maintain, and also the transferable skills that you can sort of transfer. I often think in my experience that people who've sort of played sport at a high level can transfer those skills across a broad range. They've got those sort of psychological attributes, whether it's nature or nurture, a bit of both, but they can sort of transfer them, and they make good leaders in business, and also they sort of have got these sort of qualities that can transfer across a broad range. So Neil, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board. Fantastic. So Neil, obviously, you sort of reached the pinnacle of your sport, and how did you sort of get involved in what you do? What was how did you get involved into cycling?
Kind of went along to some classification for para-sport. I found out my eyesight had been bad enough all along, and suddenly this door of going down para-sport route opened up, and it was a nice route into international sport. Quick story, I managed to make it to the Beijing Paralympics in 2008, but subsequently lost my funding, sadly. And knowing London was 4 years away, the dream of competing at a home games was so huge that I decided I was going to try every sport I could, essentially, until I found one I might be good enough at just to make the games. And I've been a lifelong fan of cycling, so I thought that's one I'm going to try first. And kind of lo and behold, it's probably the sport I should have been doing all along. It's what I've excelled at, and I guess just it suits my body type. So yeah, making the transition to that's been amazing, and my sporting career leading up to that certainly helped the transition, but it was an interesting time kind of learning how to travel at speeds obviously much quicker than what you can run at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just building up to that, what sort of sports were you doing prior to getting into cycling? Neil, what was some of the things that you were sort of participating prior to that?
Yeah, I mean, from a young age, I was doing everything really: swimming, trampolining. I even tried fencing. Gymnastics. I tried everything really, and then it was just into athletics, where even at that point I was trying every event possible. So, hurdles, long jump, high jump. Even I'm only 5'2", believe it or not, so high jump was definitely not my event. But I gave it a go and tried everything, and I eventually settled on sprinting 100 and 200 meters, and found out I'm a pure sprinter at heart, and that's kind of followed me through my rest of my whole career. I've always been a sprinter, not much of an endurance athlete, sadly.
No, that's interesting stuff. And in terms of yourself, I mean, obviously you've sort of won a lot. You've been at the very top of what you do, and sort of what motivates you now, Neil? What sort of keeps you motivated yourself, and what's your motivation? That's be interesting to know. What sort of keeps you going after you've sort of won so many championships? What sort of keeps the fire burning for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question now, because obviously for many athletes is that dream of winning Olympics or Paralympics if you're in those sports. And for me, I achieved that at London 2012. I won gold. And what often happens at that point is you win that gold medal, and then you realise you've not really got a purpose anymore, and it's hard to kind of keep going and redefine yourself. And many people have won that one title and then almost given up and just found something else. But I don't know, I've always had this ambition for a long time in cycling. It was to keep pushing the boundaries and breaking records and getting parasport up to the level of able-bodied sports, proving that athletes with a disability can compete on a level playing ground with able-bodied athletes. And that was a big motivating factor to kind of keep pushing those records. And just over the years, I just found out I'm a ridiculously competitive person. So every time there's another championship looming, another year or so away, I'm just thinking, well, maybe I could give it another crack. And the competition keeps getting harder, keeps pushing me harder. I've lost a few along the way as well, but just that hunger really to keep winning. And at the moment, I came away with silver at Rio 2016, and that was an excruciating defeat, actually. It sounds silly saying it back now that winning a silver medal at a Paralympic Games was a huge defeat, but that one really hurt, and it took a while to pick myself up, and now I'm just highly motivated to go to the Tokyo Games, which are only next year now, and hopefully win that title back.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the Tokyo Games. I think it's going to be phenomenal out there. I mean, obviously, Japan have invested money, and we saw from an athletic point of view some of the athletes in the last Olympics, they're getting up there. They're going to be competitive, no doubt. I think one thing you mentioned London there, and what was it like to win gold? That must have been an incredible feeling, Neil, to win gold and being in London. And from what I could see, I went to a few events here and there. I felt that the Paralympics was phenomenal. The whole Olympics was phenomenal, and I thought that it was well supported, and the vibe, it was just incredible, really. I mean, what was it like from an athlete's point of view, winning gold and being a part of it all?
Yeah, and as you kind of alluded to there, I mean, I think 2012 was the proper birth of the Paralympics. Just the way the amount of coverage we had, and just the level of support. I mean, partly due to some of the corporate ticketing with the Olympics, but we actually had more fans coming to the Paralympic Games than went to the Olympics, so it was just massive. So it was slightly unexpected that it would be quite as well supported as it was as an athlete, and you're kind of thinking, watching the Olympics, well, if it's just half as many people, it's going to be great, but it was just unbelievable. But with that, obviously, came a huge amount of pressure as well, that everyone's watching and there's nowhere to hide. And I went into those games not really a favourite to win. I was kind of, possibly certainly expected to medal, but not necessarily get the win. And so to win it when it was unexpected is always a huge achievement. And then just the realisation once we had won that gold that we were essentially rock stars for the next 2 weeks, that everyone knew who we were, which was unheard of in Paralympic sport, bar one or two athletes. And just kind of going in and around the Olympic Park where all the fans were. I mean, there were times we had to be shepherded around by security because it was almost dangerous to be going around because we were so famous, and it's just unbelievable. So yeah, to win it at home was in front of a home crowd was just immense, and hearing the anthem being sung by a full stadium, it's hard not to. I couldn't actually sing it myself because it was one of those such emotional moments. I was kind of scared I was going to burst into tears in front of everyone on TV. So yeah, it was huge. It's certainly unforgettable, and I don't think it's necessarily a career-defining moment, but it was a moment that kind of made me realise just how hungry I was to kind of keep getting that success, almost chasing that high in everything that I've done since as well.
That's one thing that sort of strikes me about yourself, Neil, where, I can imagine that after you've experienced that in London, it's like, well, where do we go from here? I mean, how do we beat that? Obviously the Olympics in your backyard, and in one sense, in terms of, it's a home Olympics and you've got a full house, and like you mentioned, the Paralympics, it was really in one sense the birth, because you just had phenomenal attendance. And I think one thing about the Great British public, they do get behind their teams, they love their sport, but obviously you've sort of stayed motivated, you've sort of carried on, and you've got and continue to have aspirations, and I think that is a huge testimony to yourself, really. And I think, in my experience, and each to their own. I mean, obviously some people have goals and they reach them and they move on to other things, but yourself, you sort of kept on going. And do you feel yourself do you ever feel like, I wouldn't say an obligation, but do you feel like I wouldn't even say responsibility, but in terms of inspiring, do you feel a role to play in inspiring young people? Because young people will look at people like yourself and think, well, okay, I fancy doing that as well. Obviously, it's not easy to get to where you are, and for any of us, all we can do is just be the best we can be. But do you feel you've got a sort of role to play in inspiring some young people who are going to sort of look and see your continued hunger in sport? Is that thing so you feel?
It's an interesting one because you never feel like you're a particularly inspirational person. But the one thing I have realised is since London, I've gone into many schools with medals to kind of show off, and it's amazing the reaction you get in those situations. I mean, everyone wants to see an Olympic or a Paralympic gold medal, and particularly the kids, just their eyes light up, and you can get a whole school of children just go silent when you walk in, which I'm sure most teachers would absolutely adore that ability to be able to do that. We are aware that people look up to it, and just kind of the message I really hope is that a lot of kids don't look up to us as if we're superstars, because reality is we're very, very normal people, all of us athletes on the GB team. And going back to when I was young, there was a few athletes that came along to my athletics club. I think it was particularly Dave Moorcroft came along, and just seeing him come along and talk was hugely motivational for me. And at that point, I was essentially losing every race I did. I didn't develop very quickly as a child, so I wasn't very good at sport at all. And he kind of did a talk and said that when he was young, around my age, that he was the same. He was very, very mediocre. And that inspired me just to keep going and realise that you don't have to be winning at 12 or 13 to be going on the right path down to being an Olympic champion. Anyone can do it. It just does take a lot of hard work, and of course a bit of luck along the way as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that luck does play a part. It does certainly correlate to a certain sense, but obviously hard work, determination, ability as well, and these are all things that are important too. But you do need that sort of odd thing to go your way. But I suppose what's really important, if you do get that luck, to be prepared to reap the rewards of it too. I mean, I've seen many people over the years, they've had the break, but they've not been ready for it. They've sort of almost, I wouldn't say given up, but not been prepared for that break that's come their way, and that's a big thing too. In terms of yourself, Neil, you do you mentioned then the motivation, and you do the speaking, and you go to schools and that sort of stuff. I mean, what you mentioned, the reception you get when you go into schools. Do you ever get sort of anyone turning around saying, well, I've got involved in sport, or have you sort of in terms of yourself, do you have any, if you're not already doing aspirations of being a coach, is that one way you're going to go, a path that you might go down?
Yeah, that is an interesting one, and I do love sport, and it's something. Obviously, I'm getting to the point in my career that I'm definitely towards the end of it now, sadly. But hopefully, I've still got a few years in me. But definitely planning for the future, and I think I'd like to be involved in sport. But I am also really excited by a kind of business world where I think there's a huge transfer of the skills that we have as athletes. Something you alluded to at the start of the show, that a lot of transferable skills you build up as an athlete, and that kind of methods of how you get the best out of yourself and the team around you as well. And that's something that excites me, of kind of looking at how I can to work with people in a whole different environment and see, can I actually help people achieve their full potential, and no matter what it is they do. And that's a field I'm probably going to go down. And talking about speaking in schools, I enjoy speaking on the corporate side as well, for that reason, that I think there's a lot of lessons people can learn from elite sport, where we do push ourselves obviously to the highest level we can, and it's about living a lifestyle as opposed to just turning up and doing the training, and how you build that whole environment around you to get the most out of yourself.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And certainly in my experience, Neil, it's interesting you say that. And I mean, I've been quite fortunate over the years to have worked with a number of elite athletes across a broad range of areas, and I've learnt a lot. And hopefully, I've sort of managed to sort of transfer some of my knowledge to them and help them in a small way to go to where they want to go. But one thing that sort of dawned on me as well, Neil, is in my experience of working in sort of corporations, is that it's sort of, you see the fine lines in professional sport at the level that you're at, and you kind of sometimes go into organisations, you kind of, at least the impression, I don't sound disrespectful, people do the best they can, and I'm not suggesting they sort of adopt the same sort of regimes that they do in professional sport, but I mean, people like yourself, you're out there, you're competing, there's nowhere to hide, if that sort of makes sense. You're out there, and particularly if you're playing in an individual sport, you're out there, that's it. But I suppose in business, you can sort of the financial return and statements, they don't come through till a year or so. So I think that's for me where people like yourself play a huge part, is sort of transferring, even just the vibe of being around people who are sort of really motivated and are up for it, and sort of focus on the positive, in the sense, not very positive, like, turn a situation around. That's a huge thing for me. So I certainly think that's one of the most transferable elements to business. And one of the things I used to say was, it was I sort of coined it years ago. It was a phrase where you looked at, say, a human performance indicator, where the traditional way of measuring in business is the KPI, and I thought that's useful, but it's an extrinsic tool to motivate people, which you need it to a point. But I thought, what about the human performance indicator? And what I meant by the HPI was, can you get staff to go in that are confident, motivated, enthusiastic? We all have bad days, no doubt, but these internal attributions that we've got, internal controllable factors, and because a lot of the time, from what I can see in business and environments, the focus is on external factors that are beyond the control of the person, but what they can control, they forget, and that's a huge thing for me. Control the controllables, is a huge thing, and that brings me to the mindset. And in terms of yourself, how did you get the mindset you've got, Neil? Was it something that you sort of just was innate to you and natural to you, or was it something that you sort of learnt or along the way, or a bit of both, in terms of developing your own mind and mental strength?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting one, that I think it happened naturally without me really realising, and it's only looking back now that I kind of see the path I took. And I think initially it was almost that kind of chip on my shoulder approach when I was, it's quite a typical teenage thing, but I wasn't very big, as I said before. I have my eyesight condition, and I wasn't achieving a lot, and quite often I'd come out and say, I want to run this time on the athletics track, and I had a coach who, when I said that, actually once laughed at me and kind of said, well, it's good to dream big. And I had that kind of attitude, well, I'm going to show you, I'm going to prove you wrong. And that works well up to a point, and it certainly helped, having that thought in the back of your head that you're doing this to prove someone wrong. But that can become either a positive, or it can kind of work against you down the line. And I think I did transition and stop using that probably when I started cycling, and it was more just that drive to kind of achieve myself, setting my own targets, and kind of learning the process of setting these smaller goals along the way. Like, just, you kind of said you got to turn up every day when you go into sport. There's no excuses at all. So, when I go into train in the gym, what's a few targets that I'm going to be hitting, and just that pleasure of kind of bettering yourself all the time is probably more been my driving factor in kind of later years, getting away from that. I kind of prove you wrong, but it certainly helped in the beginning.
Yeah, no, so it's interesting stuff, and I think everyone's got their own way of sort of motivating themselves, that sort of fuel that burns the fire. And the one thing certainly from yourself, when you mentioned Rio and silver and so on and so forth, where you kind of get the impression that you sort of you back yourself. And for me, one thing that's sort of missing sometimes in elite sport is that sort of sense of belief as well, where you've obviously got the belief that you sort of belong at the on the gold component of the podium. And where do you get the belief from, in terms of, is it something that's grown along the way? Have you ever believed from the beginning that you could be the best in your field at what you do, or is it something that you sort of along the way just grew organically?
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not someone who's massively self-confident, so I never really imagined myself being an Olympic or Paralympic champion growing up. I kind of thought that was probably never going to be for me, and it was just a case of, again, bettering myself rather than winning races at that stage. But I think over the years, just being involved with a team and doing the performances day in, day out, I mean, we don't go to a race really not knowing what performance we're probably going to do. We train almost every day of the week, and we're doing race-style efforts, a few times before we come to race day. So you've got a fairly good idea of where you are, and it's that repetition and just knowing you can rely on the training you've done that I think gives me the confidence that I've been here before, I've done this before. It's just another racetrack. It's just the same as a training day to a degree. Saying that, I do like to use the motivation of a race day to kind of fire me up as well. So I do like to thrive on that emotion of knowing that I have, there are people watching, and I've got a lot of expectation on myself as well. But it is certainly that confidence of the work you've done. If I went into a race that I hadn't been training for 2 or 3 months before, I suspect I wouldn't be confident at all. So it is just that repetition and hard work, I think, that gets you there.
Yeah, and that's refreshing honesty, Neil. I think that some of the young athletes listening to the show can listen to that and realise that if you focus on the process and you set yourself some small goals along the way to achieve the big goals, then who knows where the road can take you. Metaphorically, I think that's one way of certainly breaking down that sort of pressure and expectation, and certainly you strike me as a sort of person, and I think some of the elite athletes coming through as well, as they're happy to have that expectation, they back themselves. And I think for me what's really important is one thing I sort of always bang the drum for. One of my concerns has always been the funding. I just hope that the funding carries on. Sport's really important to people in this country. We've seen that, and it's really important to sort of, I think it's a feel-good factor. And you watch the Olympics and it's a buzz really, and one of the things I'd like to see people do more of is not just wait for the Olympics, get out to different events and tournaments throughout the year, but also the movers and the shakers, just to make sure that funding stays, because obviously sport's really important to the general public, and we want to see the athletes do well and inspire a generation going forward. In terms of if anyone's listening who wants to sort of get involved and look into things, have you got any insights into how they can do that, Neil? If any sort of anyone of any age, but generally young people too, if they want to get involved in sort of Paralympic sports, is any pathway they can follow? Or
yeah, well, I mean, particularly for those living obviously in the northwest, from a cycling point of view, you're in a great place. I mean, we've got the British cycling team based at the Velodrome, and that's why I'm based in the area. So if it's cycling you want to be involved in, then whether it be on the track side in BMX, then we've got the National Cycling Centre where kids can come along and have a go. And I think there are some disability-specific sessions as well. And then there are plenty of road clubs around as well who run things for any age groups. But particularly from a parasport point of view. I'm aware there's, I think through possibly the BBC, that you can log in and kind of search for sports, and it tells you local disability clubs. There's still a lot of work to be done on the parasport side of things, but there are a lot more clubs popping up, particularly in the northwest. So, just go on, have a search, and find where a club is. And I couldn't advocate enough, particularly being a child who had a disability, that I wasn't very confident at all. And it was being involved in sport that kind of brought out my self-confidence, my ability to socialise with others. And even had it not got to the level I've got to, I'd look back with such fondness on being involved in sport from a young age and how it helped me develop as a person. So I strongly encourage anyone who's keen just to get out and try it. And it really doesn't matter what ability you're at, just have fun. That's what we're all about in sport, is having fun.
Tremendous, Neil. I really appreciate you sort of, sharing some insights, and time sort of going really quick. It's sort of getting the best of us. But I really want to thank you for coming on board the show. It's been really insightful, and we in this area we live in a big sporting community, and hopefully people have listened in and have been inspired from what you've achieved, and also at least they've got an idea of what they can do to take things further in terms of getting involved in the sport itself. So we'll certainly be great to sort of track your progress for the next games, and we wish you all the best. Neil, thanks for coming on board the show, and no doubt we'll speak again sometime.
Thank you. I look forward to coming back on sometime soon.
Thanks, Neil. And that was Neil Fachie, who 13 times world, 4 times Commonwealth champion, Paralympic champion, giving us an incredible insight into his career thus far, and he's still hungry for more. He's still looking to go to Tokyo. Colin, how do you explain it yourself? I mean, what are your thoughts? We've been very privileged today to have some fantastic guests, and what are your thoughts in terms of, Neil alluded to transferring these skills to business, but also the motivation to keep going. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, as you said there, Jim, it's just inspiring. It seems to be the best word, isn't it? Whenever you speak to anybody like Neil or some of the people I've been fortunate to work with, just to hear their story and what they've been through and how much they've actually committed to achieve what they achieve. And it's always fascinating, isn't it, to try and understand from their point of view as to what it is that keeps them going. Particularly, as you say, after they've already achieved some success, go again and go again and go again. And it's something I talk about. I still work with 1 or 2 athletes myself now, and it's something that we try and understand and better kind of try and work out from their point of view how they do that. But I don't think there's a particular silver bullet, is there really? I think, as you said, is it the nature-nurture thing? Every athlete's different. Everyone's got kind of different motivators and things like that. I just think generally it's inspiring, isn't it? It's just listening to people like that. And I think it's great that people like Neil and other athletes like Neil go into schools and speak to, because I think it's very important that from a young age we try and share these ideas. I think that's one of the big things. I know you feel very strongly about that, and I do. And I've had the privilege to work with lots of young kids at school, getting into different sports and things. And I think personally, I feel that really is important, that we continue to kind of push and promote that, almost so it becomes the norm. And as you said, I don't think it's just necessarily about, it's great that people go on to achieve what they do and have real success at the highest level. But I think just the fact that people are involved in sport and what people get from sport, I think that's more important, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's a great point, Colin. Great point indeed. I think that community spirit as well, that it encourages and it fosters community spirit and breeds confidence and motivation. And I think we're at that point where it's neither nature nurture, it's environment and genetic environment correlation. I'm putting my neuroscientist hat on there. But equally in saying that, I know that you were involved in youth programs. I don't know if you're still involved in programs with young people, but do you have any insights, Colin, in how that people can get involved, young people get involved in sort of cycling or?
Yeah. I don't perhaps do as much as I did when you and I first met, but having been in and around it, and having been really fortunate to work with some amazing young people and gone on their journeys with them, I do still work with 4 or 5 young athletes that are not as young as they were when I started working with them. But I think generally, and as you said before, and I think Neil alluded to it, that we're super fortunate in the Northwest for a start, and I'm sure it's the same in other places, but we're really privileged, I think, in terms of sport in the Northwest, regardless of what the sport is. I do think it is more accessible. I think, regardless of what sport, what level, in my experience and having spoke to lots of people and seen some of the programs that schools and communities do, which is fantastic, that there are opportunities and there are, great ways, easy ways in, really. And I think, I suppose, as you say, it's kind of just really thinking about just getting involved, give things a go. If it's not right, try something else, speak to people. But just being involved, I think, is the most important thing.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I think that's, you got to be in it to win it, so to speak. Who knows where the road's going to take you? That's the sort of key to all things. And, I think first and foremost, would you agree it's about enjoyment? Enjoy yourself, enjoy the game, or enjoy whatever you're participating in. Then who knows? It's possible that you can go on to the highest level. No one really knows, but obviously there's many permutations in terms of injury, illness, different things that sort of happen. Our genetic compatibility to being the best we can be in a specific field too is really important. So absolutely. And yourself, Colin, I mean, what yourself? I mean, obviously you've got an abundance of experience. Where do you sort of see yourself going from where you are now?
I think Neil alluded to it there, and I know it's something that you talk about, that I think that the main thing, that's a great point. I would agree, just to pull up that thread a little bit, that fact about enjoyment. Regardless of what we're doing, if we don't enjoy it, we're never going to be successful, and I think that applies regardless, whether that's sport, business. I think that's really, really important. Obviously, we're both very fortunate that we clearly enjoy and love what we do. I think for me, it's just, I personally, it's something I would talk about and suggest to all of my clients, the need for definitely to enjoy what we do, but I think just this continual process of learning, really. I think everybody at whatever level they're at, I think there's something that we can learn, and I think that the learning process for us all is really key. So that's pretty fundamental for me, really, is just to continue learning. I learn from my clients, I learn through education and listening, reading, all the ways that I can, really. And I think regardless of who it is or what we're trying to achieve, I think that's kind of fundamental to it.
Absolutely. No, it's an invaluable insight, and the show has gone so fast, the Friday Sports Show, myself, and very, very privileged to have yourself on the show too, Colin, with some fantastic guests, Neil Fachie and Lawrie McKinna. Thanks for coming on board the show. Colin, no doubt you'll be back on again.
Appreciate it.
To share your thoughts around sport and what you're doing as well outside. I want to thank you all for listening. It's been a great show, an action-packed show. It's gone so quick. Do get in touch for our social media, the Friday Sports Show, Salford 94.4 FM. Do send us an email. We're at the same time, same place next week. Do tune in, and wherever you are, whatever you're doing, have a fantastic weekend and get involved in all the local community sports out there. Have a great weekend. Thank you.